Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards in the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Duke. This is a 5-cost victory card from Intrigue, and it says worth 1 point per duchy you have. Now what I thought I'd do when discussing this card is I thought I'd talk a little bit more about the theory around how Duke scores and how you maximise points from Duke, and then we'll take a little bit more into the practical applications of actually incorporating a strategy that is focused on Duke. So first of all, Duke has a very high theoretical maximum number of points. If you can get all of the duchies and all of the dukes, that massively outscores getting all of the provinces. So if you consider that 8 provinces is 48 points, but if you get all 8 duchies and all 8 dukes, that's 88 points, a big 40 points more than the province pile. Right, in fact, that's even more than getting all 8 colonies, which is only 80 points, right? So Duke, in theory, can hold its own against some of the stronger victory point cards out there, which sounds pretty good. Now, when do provinces tend to outscore Duke? And that is if the province player can get 3 duchies. So 8 provinces and 3 duchies beats 5 duchies and all 8 dukes. So if you are going to go all in on buying dukes and duchies, you're really looking to get at least 6 duchies. That is a strong position because it means that the province player sort of can't really outscore you anymore. I'm assuming here, of course, that the Duke player is never going for provinces. They're just focusing on Duke. And I guess the province player is not actually taking any of the Dukes from you either. If you want to outscore just 8 provinces on their own, the minimum number of cards you need to do this is 11, which is 7 duchies and 4 dukes. And of course, if you're already at that position, then you're in a much better place to continue to outscore your opponent, because if you have 7 duchies, the remaining dukes are way better for you than they are for your opponent. And in fact, this sort of underlies a really important point about Duke, and that is that the duchies are the more important half of the duchy-duke combo. So if you want to get the most points out of Duke, you really want to make sure you get as many duchies as you can. So each duchy your opponent gets, instead of you, is a 14-point swing in their favour. So if you think that if they get a duchy, that's 3 points for them, and it's 3 points that you've been denied, but also each of your 8 dukes goes down by 1 point as well, so it's a total of a 14-point difference. Now, because it outscores provinces so much when you go all in, like that 14-point swing on its own is not enough. In fact, 7 duchies is good enough. In fact, in theory, you only really need 6, but if you can get to 7, then frankly, you don't really need to buy the 8th duchy, because it's going to be so many points when you buy dukes that your opponent just can't keep up. Right? Once you get to 7 duchies, it's not worth your opponent trying to deny you dukes anymore, because they basically are not worth. They're really expensive estates for your opponent, while they are better than province for you. So it becomes unnecessary for your opponent to try and deny you dukes at that point. If they try and go for it, they're still going to lose, because you just get so many points. And of course, if your opponent is actually going for dukes strategy rather than, like, say, going for provinces, still getting more duchies than your opponent is really important. If you are both doing a duke strategy, then whoever gets more duchies than their opponent is probably going to win, right? Because at that point, you just continue to score more if you can do that. So if you are facing someone against a duke strategy as well, take the duchies, right? You got to get as many duchies as you can first. So the general idea in theory, Duke therefore monopolise duchies as much as you can. You want to get 7, 6 is also fine. If you hit 8 early and you're going in on a Duke strategy, don't buy the province, buy the duchy instead. Now, the only time you really want to buy the province is if all the duchies are gone and you only had 5 of them or less, because at that point, you kind of need to deny provinces, because the province player will eventually outscore you if they're allowed to get all of the provinces. For Duke, you really need to play the long game. So Duke decks They start off earning points pretty slowly when you're buying duchies. You're only getting 3 points at a time, but then as soon as you stop buying the duchies and you start going into buying dukes, the amount of points you get starts to ramp up very significantly, because now you've switched over from buying cards that are worth 3 points to buying cards that are worth hopefully at least twice as much as that. So all of your points are basically back-loaded into the game. You start getting the points really late. So that's enough about Duke in theory, but how does Duke really work in practice? So Duke needs a lot of time to pay off. The way that Duke tries to win games is by having it go really long. If you want to go all in on Duke, then the game is not going to be short, because Duke cannot really do short games. What you really want to do is you want to force your opponent to have to tackle the entire province pile by themselves. If you watched my video on the base cards, I think it's video number 27, there was an important point I said where you basically don't want to help your opponent win. If your opponent is ignoring dukes, then they probably want to finish the game on emptying the province pile, or maybe getting in a quick 3 pile when they can. What you really want to do as the Duke player is not let either of those happen. So make your opponent put in all of the work to emptying the entire province pile. Similarly, if you're going all in on Duke, you need to support more pure victory stock cards in your deck, right? Because not only are you buying an entire pile of duchies, hopefully, but then there's a second pile of victory cards in Duke that you need as well. So if you are going to go for Duke, you're going to have a bad time if you try and run some sort of functional engine, because you're just going to put in way too many victory cards. Now, something that's really important to note here, Dominion is a fast game most of the time, and Duke is a slow card. And most of the time, honestly, Duke is just too slow. Duke loses in most kingdoms because building an engine and buying provinces is really, really strong. Province is actually a very strong card, and Duke tries to be an alternative to province, but a slower alternative. Duke gets a lot worse with the more players that you add, because games tend to have less turns per player the more players you have. So if you think in a 2-player game, if you are playing against an opponent who wants to go for provinces, then they need to drain 8 provinces out of the pile by themselves. But if it's 3-player, there's 12 provinces between you 3, but that's only 6 per player, so that's 2 less provinces, so they're going to do it quicker. And in 4-player, it's only 4 provinces per player, which is half as much as 2-player. So if Duke is too slow in most 2-player games, it's way too slow in most 4-player games, because the province pile just drains really quickly. And of course, those province players don't have to worry about having so many provinces in their deck, because the pile just runs out really quickly. So Duke doesn't really do very well with engines. It sort of anti-synergizes with it, and that is because of the fact that it is an unplayable stock card, right? It's just a pure victory card. It doesn't do anything to help you actually run an engine. You're going to clog your deck with a lot of duchies before you can start scoring big points, and that just makes your engine choke up and die, basically. The strongest deck type in the game, drawing all of your cards each turn, gets a lot harder when you've got the entire duchy pile in your deck, right? So if you were hoping with Duke that you might build a deck that gets up to, for example, buying 3 duchies per turn, like you say you have 15 money and 3 buys, that's not going to last very long, because you're adding so many victory cards to your deck. And usually in that case, you're better off just buying 2 provinces. So if you think that, for example, 2-player game, you and your opponent are both building up to 16 money and a number of buys, you know, you buy 2 provinces, they buy 2 provinces, you buy 2 provinces, they buy 2, and that's it, the game is over, right? You only have to do that twice each, and then the game ends. Right, just 2 turns where you buy double province. So that's really, really fast. And if you think that you wanted to have a turn instead where you bought like 3 duchies, you know, you see how you just end up with way more cards, and it takes way longer And yeah, it's just, you just can't really go for a Duke strategy with an engine, is the key point. Like, you have to be doing something else. So when is Duke good then? If all of the good engines don't like it, how do you actually decide when to go for Duke? And in my mind, there's sort of two questions that you tend to want to answer. So number one, can your opponent drain the province pile by themselves in a reasonable length of time? So the most common way that a Duke player is going to lose is that the game ends too quickly for them to build up a big score of points. And if you are not helping them empty the province pile and they have to do it by themselves, how long is that going to take them? Are they going to build an engine that really cannot manage many victory cards and it's going to choke, or can they do it pretty quickly? And the second thing is can you reach 5 fairly consistently when you consider the fact that you've spent all game basically buying a load of victory cards? So take a look a bit more into each of these questions. So first of all, a quick note, when I say draining the province pile, this is not necessarily the same thing as saying that your opponent actually has to buy all 8 provinces. They just need to empty the pile quickly enough. So we've mentioned this in, for example, the remodel video. Sometimes you can just churn through the province pile more easily. So if you have remodel, for example, then what you really need to do is you only need to say buy 5 provinces and then play remodel 3 times during that time where you trash a province and gain another province, right? And that ends the game. And that was like, the province pile only really almost half the size, effectively. You only bought 5 of them instead of 8. That's a lot easier than having to buy all 8, and it's a lot quicker too. So do watch out for quick and easy ways to drain the province pile. I've given some examples here: remodel, rebuild, and salt the earth. So these are all things that just trash provinces, basically, at no real harm to you. Something that tends to mean Duke is going to be good is when the kingdom doesn't really have a very good draw. So most Duke decks tend to have quite a lot of treasure and tend to be looking to fill their deck with a bunch of treasure and just not draw cards. When there is no draw available in a kingdom, it's a lot harder to hit 8. It is very substantially harder to hit 8 consistently when you only get 5 card hands. And this is especially true when the province player starts adding some provinces to their deck, right? So you might be able to hit 8 pretty easily early on, but once you start clogging up your deck with these victory cards, suddenly it's not so easy anymore with 5 card hands. If you think about, for example, the cantrip kingdom, I've talked about it before, your deck is just made up of like markets or merchants or something, just these cards that are giving you +1 coin, +1 card, +1 action. They're not increasing your hand size, but you're just trying to cycle through. Well, each time you draw a province when doing that, that is reducing your ability to actually get through your deck with those. And if you've got no draw, eventually you will draw 5 provinces, and then your ability to keep drawing cards just stops. And you might not have hit 8. And in that case, well, that turn, you didn't manage to do it. So no draw. This is a big sign that Duke might be good in this deck. So the typical way that you are playing with Duke is what is referred to as a slog deck. So you are simply going to be buying 1 card per turn. You're going to be buying Duchies early and often, right? When you want to go with Duke, because it takes so long to pay off, you are basically going all in and you're saying, right, my whole deck is just going to be focused around getting Duchies and getting Dukes. So in these sorts of decks, copper tends to be pretty good. The reason why is because if you have a big, bloated deck, then each time you add a victory card to it, proportionally, it's not really hurting you as much. If you are trying to draw your deck every single turn, then adding in a victory card means you're drawing that into your hand every turn, right? It's getting in the way every turn. But if you have a big deck of like 30 cards, then with no draw, it's going to take you like 6 turns to get all the way through. And you add a card to it, you only see it once every 6 turns, right? So it's not so bad. So because copper's quite good in these decks, trashing might not be so good. So you certainly wouldn't like play with Chapel if you were going to go all in on a Duke deck usually. That's not always true. There are reasons to actually want to trash coppers, but it's much worse than your standard engine trashing if you're doing this. And that's, again, because you want the coppers, you want the bloated deck. Bear in mind that it is quite hard to get lots of Duchies and Dukes quickly because they cost 5. This is sort of why it turns into a slog. So there are lots of easy ways to gain 4-cost cards. You've got all of your workshop type of cards and like remodelling estates and so on. But getting 5-cost cards is quite substantially more difficult. This means you are going to need to actually be buying them the vast majority of the time. And if you're only really looking to buy 1 card per turn, right, it's going to take you a while. So it is possible to gain 5-cost cards directly with cards like Artisan. And yeah, they're helpful in Duke decks. But most of the time, you're just going to be buying a load of victory cards. So what we really want to do is try and consistently hit 5. This is another thing that will really make Duke a viable strategy on a deck, and that is hitting 5 pretty consistently from a 5-card hand. So sometimes you get cards that discard for coin, and they tend to be pretty good. So Mill and Horse Traders. Mill replaces itself and then lets you discard 2 cards for 2 coins. It's very easy to hit 5 if you have a bunch of mills in your deck. That's one of the things that's particularly good at. And the Horse Traders is sort of the same thing as mill, but it's terminal instead. Gold Gainers, also pretty good. Having a lot of gold in a deck with no draw, it really helps to hit 5. It helps to hit 8 as well, but it's real easy to hit 5 if you can draw a gold, right? Like, it's very substantially easier. So anything that is gaining you golds tends to be quite good. Some gold gainers also give you money on the turn you play them, like Hoard and Treasure Trove. Those are 2 examples that are really, really good with Duke, right? They're just flooding you with all these treasures, high-quality treasures, giving you money to buy the Dukes as well. Sometimes you want to be buying Dukes early, so the game might be close to ending and you really need more points sooner rather than later. So it could be that your opponent is threatening a 3 pile is usually going to be the case. In that sort of situation, you may decide that you want to be buying Dukes earlier, like maybe you haven't reached 7 Duchies yet. If you want to maximise your short-term points while buying Dukes, then you always want at least 3 more Duchies than Dukes. So as soon as you've bought your 4th Duchy, you can pick up a Duke. Then you go for your 5th Duchy, and then you go for your 2nd Duke, and then you go for your 6th Duchy, and then you go for your 3rd Duke. But you only want to do this if not doing this would cause you to lose the game, because in reality it's still more important to focus on the Duchies first most of the time. If it's still okay to play the long game, just get as many Duchies as you can before you buy any Dukes. So what about attacks? How do they impact Duke? Well, Duke strategies actually usually are pretty badly hampered by attacks. So attacks slow games down. And you might think to yourself, oh, that's really good because Duke is a very slow strategy. So I want a slow game. But the problem is a lot of attacks actually can slow down the Duke player as well, and because it's already a slow strategy, that makes it really slow, and that's actually pretty terrible for the Duchy Duke player. So a particular thing to note here, trashing attacks. Duke gets absolutely annihilated by most trashing attacks. That's because most trashing attacks up there can destroy 5-cost cards or your silvers and golds, and silvers and golds are usually pretty important to a Duke deck. If you're going for the Duke slog, a lot of the time you are going to have a bunch of silvers and possibly golds, so getting them pinched is pretty bad. Cards that trash at 5, we're thinking about things like Knights and Swindler. You know, those are sort of the classic examples of cards, trashing attacks, I mean to say. Junkers are pretty bad too, so you might think to yourself, oh, you know, Junker is fine because you've got this big deck, you know, you're not drawing the curses as often, so having a big bloated deck, having a bunch of curses is fine. But the truth is that if your deck is getting loaded with curses, it actually does start to get difficult to hit 5, because you've only got a 5-card hand. And if you've got some dukes and then you've got like 2 curses in your hand as well, like how you're only trying to hit 5 with like 2 or 3 cards in effectively, and that actually does get very difficult. So you can get drowned in curses as a Duchy Duke player. It is a threat. Discard attacks like Militia, they might not seem so bad because if you had like 2 Duchies in your hand, discarding 2, so most of my deck is garbage, so I'm just going to discard them anyway, right? In that case, they might not feel that bad. However, if you are discarding a lot of coppers, then actually they can really hurt you. So if you think about how Militia is really good at the start of the game, because you are mostly using coppers and you're trying to like hit 5, and how Militia really not hobbles you from doing that. Well, the same is also true in a Duchy Duke slog. Like if you just have a load of like coppers and you are discarding down to 3 card hands, well, a silver and 2 coppers isn't good enough, and a 3 card hand to actually hit 5. And stuff like Militia really can stop you from hitting that crucial 5 point. So unless you've got a whole bunch of golds, like some really good gold gainer, you might find that Duke actually does struggle against stuff like Militia as well. It can do. So an overall summary for Duke. It's usually pretty bad. Duke is a weak card. When a card is only good on weak kingdoms, that means it's a bad card, and you aren't going to play with it most of the time. But when it's good, it's very good. It defines the deck that you play in, and it's like, oh, this is a Duke deck, right? And it's a Duke kingdom. Duke wins on the kingdom, right? It just dominates everything else when Duke is actually good. What you want to do is you want to look for kingdoms with engines that are either going to collapse because they can't get enough provinces, or you have no draw at all. So again, looking at things like cantrip kingdoms, things that just cannot handle clogging up their deck with provinces, and they don't have ways to churn through provinces. Those sorts of engines are usually very weak, and as you play more, you'll start to get experience with what it means for an engine to be weak, and you can see how most engines are going to be able to pick up like 2 or 3 provinces, no problem, but some of them will then just collapse at that point. Like they really struggle, and getting like 8 provinces in the deck, like they just can't handle it. You'll know it. You'll start to gain a feel for that over time. Most of the time when we're talking about a Duke, someone's going all in on a Duke strategy, buying victory cards early and often. Yes, it sort of can, in theory, act a little bit like a second Duchy pile if you've got some like extended endgame, but the vast majority of the time that's largely inconsequential, and it's basically Duke is a card you go all in on. And the real most important thing here, you want to prioritise the Duchies, okay? You want to focus on the long term and drag out the game, because that is how Duke scores big. You have to let the game go long. And that's it for Duke. So what we are going to do now is we are going to head over to the online client, and we are going to generate some kingdoms that have Duke in it, and we are going to see how well it goes. So what do we have here? So we've got good trashing with Steward, we've got a village, we've got Torturer. This is a Torturer engine. You're getting thin, and then your Duke player is just going to get crushed under Torturer. To be fair, they'd get crushed with a minion deck as well. Drawing a random 4 cards, like minion, really hurts the Duke player because they don't get to choose what they discard. The Duke's going to lose because the Torturer engine is going to absolutely annihilate them. Basically, they're going to be forced to take curses, or they're going to have to like discard their whole hand, and they're just not going to get anywhere. You might think like, oh, Mill, Duke, Gardens, Harem, right? There's a lot of alternate points here, but Torturer is really strong, and there is a village. And the province player gets to slow down the Duke player so much that they can just draw with Torturer, thin with Steward, get money somehow, but I guess they might have a mill. They're going to open, like, do they open Steward and mill? I guess maybe they open Steward and silver is probably better. They're just going to, is there any plus buy? There is not. So they're just going to buy 1 province per turn, and they are actually going to do it fairly consistently. The Duke player is just going to get destroyed by Torturer, basically, so they can't do it. So yeah, Duke's no good here. it can't win. Even with some other victory cards, like, they can't do it. You might say to yourself, oh, well, can you mix Duke and Gardens? And the answer is usually no, right? Picking up a Gardens is not good compensation for missing 5, because if you're buying Gardens, you're not buying Duchies, and then your Dukes aren't going to be very good either. So with good trashing from Steward, Torturer player is just too fast here, and they can just drain all the provinces themselves, because Torturer's a really good draw card as well. Yes, they can't. They have to slowly buy like Mining Village and Torturer and alternate, and they're probably going to go above 3 Torturers. They're going to go like 4 or maybe 5, but they got the time to do it against a Duke player. So Duke's bad on that board. So no Duke. Let's see what we've got on this next kingdom. Oh, it's Torturer again with Mining Village. But no Steward this time. The trashing is Masquerade, however, which is another very strong victory card. There is Buy with Market, and there is Conspirator to really pay off the engine with like Vassal and Regular Village. This is another Torturer engine, but this time the player can go bonkers with Market and Conspirators and Village. They can buy so many cards very quickly. They're going to thin real easy with Masquerade. It's not great to be masqueraded as a Duchy Duke player, because you really don't want to be passing over your Duchies or your Dukes. And yeah, the combination of these, again, it's sort of the same thing as last game, really, except this time it's even worse for Duke. Like, the engine is so powerful here. If someone tries to just buy Duchies all game and then Dukes, are going to get completely destroyed, right? So you can't do it. Conspirator is going to allow your opponent with Market and like Vassals to start double provincing pretty fast once they set up their Torturer engine, actually. So yeah, the Duke's got no chance on that board. You're never going to pick up a Duke. Crazy if you do it on their board. What about here? So we have... The only trashing is Remodel, which is not great. We do have Ironworks Mill, which is kind of nice. So you can get up to like 5, and you got Market. The big problem here is the coppers, actually. There's no good way to get rid of them. There's not really a village, but there is Throne Room, so there is a village, and you can have a bunch of mills and throne that, and then get Courtyard. You can probably, instead of buying Courtyard, you can start remodeling some coppers into Courtyard and remodel estates into like Throne Rooms. Drawing's not wonderful, but you can eventually get a nice engine going. With Mill, Courtier is nice if you want it. Do you need it? I don't know. I guess you are going to need it at some point. But I really like Ironworks, picking up mills, getting Throne Rooms with the Ironworks as well, and like remodel, and maybe even some Wishing Wells, actually. But you can remodel to gain some Courtyards too. The engine seems pretty good here. Market's really nice for it. If your opponent does try to go Duchy Duke, maybe you want to pick up a Bandit over a Courtier and hope to trash some of their silvers and golds, because how is the Duchy Duke player going to play? I mean, they do have Mill, but they are going to need some silvers and golds. It's not great. So the draw is not fantastic here, is the only problem for the province player, but there is Remodel to churn through the provinces. So when your opponent starts being able to sort of get an engine going a little bit, and they will eventually start drawing some stuff with Courtyard, they can probably buy some, and they start picking up a load of stuff with Ironworks. Maybe they get more than one Ironworks. They will be able to just drain provinces pretty fast by playing a Remodel every turn to just chop provinces. And the Duke player just has no hope, really. They are not going to win on a Duchy Duke strategy. So 3 out of 3, Duke is bad and cannot beat the engine. So this is pretty typical for Duke. These are not bad rolls. The Duke is not good most of the time. It's just the reality. So here, there is no village, is the big thing that I spot straight away. There is Witch. There is Masquerade. These are pretty good cards. There's even a Replace, which is an attack that can also chop provinces. What is the alternative engine here? I think I like Witch, no matter whether I'm going for Duchy Duke or not. Would I want trading post? I don't think I do, because if I open 5-2, am I getting a trading post? I mean, maybe, but I'm definitely opening Masquerade on a 3-4, and I'm probably doing Masquerade and Silver. I don't like a minion stack here because... Oh, maybe it's good, actually, thinking about it. No, because there's no village, and I want to be playing a witch. I sort of don't like minion that much. I want to have one witch and one Masquerade, and I'm going to play Masquerade and then eventually get a witch, and I'm probably playing one or the other on most turns. Is a replace actually good? So... if my opponent tries to Duchy Duke, I get to curse them a bunch, and I also get to play Masquerade on them as well. And that means most of the time we're going to be swapping coppers, probably, but occasionally that's going to put them in a nasty spot. I certainly would Witch early, and then I have the Masquerade for later. That's just because basically the Duchy Duke player doesn't have a good hand size. In fact, Minion is quite nice combined with Masquerade if my opponent dares to try a Duchy Duke, because I can give them a smaller hand and then I can probably Masquerade them at some point. Maybe it is a Minion stack. No, because there's the curses, right? The Masquerade player, I get to actually give possibly curses to the Duchy Duke player. I don't know. I guess this one's a little bit more up for grabs, but the attacks are good enough. I know Masquerade is not an attack, but it kind of feels like it against a Duchy Duke player. I don't think Duchy Duke is going to work out. I think I want to... I want to say Witch Big Money with Masquerade support early on. Like, maybe that really is better. Maybe I get some golds, and maybe I do eventually pick up a replace, and then I chop provinces while also attacking my opponent when I do it. I think that, yeah, okay, that's definitely going to be better. The replace I might not use very often, but if it actually just helps drain the province pile quickly enough, Duchy Duke player can't do anything about it, not under a bunch of cursing as well. So... yeah, it's sort of a weird board. There's no real cohesive strategy going on, but it's still not good enough for Duke. So I think 4 out of 4 at the moment. Duke is bad. And is Duke going to win on the last one? So we have Sentry and Upgrade for trashing. Those are really good. We've got Market again. Our only draw is Wishing Well. Well, this is interesting. The draw is really bad here. There is good trashing, but what do you do with the trashing? Right? Do you go for a Market Cantrip Kingdom supported by Lurkers and Wishing Wells? That feels absolutely terrible. Is Bureaucrat good against the Duchy Duke player? Honestly, maybe. There is no village. It and mine are the only terminals that you would play here, but potentially pawn. But I want to trash a load of cards with that upgrade, so I'm probably not going mine. I'm honestly... Surely it is not like Lurker Market Cantrip with like Wishing Wells and Bureaucrat to get some silvers. I mean, come on. Is it really that? Maybe I don't get upgrade. Maybe it's just Sentry. Well, you know what? Sentry is actually really nice in a Cantrip Kingdom to try and skip over provinces as they come in. And you can probably get 2 Lurkers early and get enough mileage out of them and possibly even just trash them later on when all the markets run out. Do I really want to do a Market Cantrip Kingdom with sentries? Does that just take too long? Like, these cards are not very good. If you've got a load of markets, Wishing Well is not bad, but it will eventually fall apart. Does Duke finally get a look in? Maybe Duke is actually good enough here. Maybe what you do is you can actually use Harbinger in a Duchy Duke deck. Like, it might be fine. Maybe the Duchy Duke player, do they grab a Bureaucrat? Maybe they do. right? And they just want a bunch of silvers, and they're just going to try and Duchy Duke. They're never really going to be buying any 5-cost cards because they would rather be Duchying. Maybe they can get 1 the first time they hit 5. This doesn't feel good, but to be fair, the engine doesn't feel very good either because it's expensive cantrip with market. And like the only other good thing to do is like Lurker, which is 2 stop card spaces, which is real bad if your only draw is Wishing Well, because that's just not a very good draw. And you can't even really like cantrip with Pawn. This actually might be a Duchy Duke board. I think Duke could actually get a look in here. I think we did actually find one in the 5th game. The engine just doesn't feel very good. I don't think it's too hard to get enough sentries to actually make a smooth market cantrip game, I think. The Bureaucrat feels bad, but you don't want the silvers. This is the big problem. You can't really... You're top decking a silver if you add a Bureaucrat to your deck as the province player. And silvers, yeah, they're just not very good. If you can't do 8 provinces in a market deck, right? Like with Bureaucrat, you can't do that. So yeah, you get hit by Bureaucrat probably, but the Bureaucrat is just too bad. You can't be consistently buying province with a load of silvers from Bureaucrat in your deck. You can't do it. Silver's just not good enough to hit 8 and get through 8 provinces. So I think this is a Duchy Duke deck, and what you're going to do is you are just going to be buying silvers and golds. Maybe we get a mine as the Duke player, and we just upgrade some of our coppers anyway, because we can. Maybe we get a Bureaucrat. Like, maybe those are fine, and we get a Bureaucrat, and maybe we mine. Like, the first 5 we get as a mine, and then after that, it's just Duchies and Dukes all the way, and we open with Bureaucrat and silver. Probably you just do that. It's pretty sad, but I think it's fine. I think it will win. I think the engine cannot get 8 provinces very easily. So there we go. We actually did find a Duke board. I wasn't actually sure we were going to find one. I thought this was going to be 5 straight up no's for Duke, but I think this board stinks enough. The cards are just weak, and the only strong cards on this board are trashing. That's the problem. There's nothing to do once you've trashed your deck down, and that's why this is Duke. So yeah, so Duke, you've got to assess it in every game, but honestly, most of the time it just isn't very good. But when it's good, and sometimes you will get caught out by that, and you will get beaten by a Duchy Duke deck because you just forgot that it can be good sometimes. Yeah, but otherwise generally pretty weak. Anyway, I hope that was useful for you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.